Brought to you by MuleSoft. With its API-led approach to connecting the world's apps, data, and Internet of Things, MuleSoft's AnyPoint platform has helped enterprises around the globe revolutionize their businesses. What can MuleSoft do for you? To find out, visit MuleSoft.com.
Hi, I'm David Berlin, Editor-in-Chief of ProgrammableWeb. You're watching and listening to the Developers Rock podcast. And with me today is Ross Mason. He is the founder of MuleSoft. And Ross, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, it's great to be here.
Yeah. So first, I need to disclose that ProgrammableWeb is a wholly owned subsidiary of MuleSoft. However, I've been here for 5 years, as long as MuleSoft has owned ProgrammableWeb. And as far as I can remember, this is the first time I'm actually interviewing you. Is that right?
I think it might be, yeah. Kind of weird.
Isn't that crazy?
There are conversations that felt like interviews in the past.
Yeah. Well, we get a chance to talk a lot offline and over beers and stuff. And I always love to hear the way you think, because you're thinking way out into the future, and you're crystallizing a lot of variables into one kind of common thread. And today, these days, you're out there talking about something called artificial intelligence in a jar. I read this article that you wrote on CBR, and then I saw that Phil Wainwright interviewed you about the same topic on Diginomica, and it sort of captured my attention because I'm intensely interested in artificial intelligence. And so when I saw that you were out there talking about it, I said, we got to connect, and I want to hear what he's saying about it. So what is AI in a jar?
Yeah, so I liken artificial intelligence the way some people have been thinking about it as very sort of this isolated technology that you plug in data sets, you run some algorithms, you run some training sets, and then you get some insight. And certainly some of the first generation sort of AI products, if you like, so like a Watson or something, requires you to dump a shed load of data into that platform and then start running algorithms off of it. It's very much like big data. The way people thought about big data is like put loads of stuff in there and then we'll figure out later like what the insights are going to be, and that hasn't actually worked that well. Mm-hmm. AI is a bit different because you're not only looking for insights, but you're looking for actions, right? And one of the values of AI is that it can process much more data much more quickly than humans can. But also, the reason we process data is not just to learn; it's actually to do things, and
to make decisions based on what it unearths.
So quite a lot of it comes down to automation, especially automation around processes, around robotics, whatever else. And what that means is you can't just have an insight isolated. So I always liken AI to this brain in a jar, right? This thing that's very smart, but it hasn't got a nervous system. It can't affect anything unless it's connected with a nervous system to the things around it that it wants to act upon. And I think many organizations they're very early in their thought process around AI and how it's going to influence their business. But this idea that by plugging an AI engine in, suddenly I'm going to get insights and automate stuff is a bit false. It's not thinking about the whole problem. And the whole problem really is, once I got an insight and I'm getting 1,000 insights a second, how do I then, as an example, how do I then act upon those insights? And the only way you can do that is by having a way to connect into everything else that matters. And everything else that matters isn't just the software platform you're running on like IBM Watson, but it's all your legacy systems. I'll give you an example, right? So I invest in a lot of early stage startups, and I've got a few who are doing sort of edge AI sort of bots and sort of automation around customer support, customer service, information discovery, and all of them have the same problem, right? Imagine if you've got a chatbot for an insurance company, and the point of that chatbot is to take common functions and automate them. So if I want to change my address, I want to look up my policy, I want to look up when my policy expires, I got to be able to understand. So the AI piece is understanding what that person is asking for. That's kind of what that machine learning set of algorithms does. But in order once I've understood what they want, I've got to go and figure out how to go and get that information, right? And the way AI startups are attacking this is they're not going to store all the data inside their machine learning algorithms. They store enough to understand what the person is trying to ask for, and then they've got to go and act on it. And this is where like chatbots and these chat functions have actually fallen short, is because to do anything basic like change an address, right? Change an address in an enterprise. I think people realize how hard this is. But if you try to change an address in a bank, you're probably going to go and update 14 systems. So not having a central place to plug that in means it's really, really expensive to offer very basic functionality, and which means you can't leverage the newer technology sort of advancements around self-serve customer support, for example.
So in some ways you're talking about this idea, and when you think about nervous systems, it makes me think of like, what's the parasympathetic response, right? Like, the human is not, what's that?
I have no idea what you just said means. What is that?
Well, like the nervous system has sympathetic and parasympathetic responses, right? And those are responses, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the parasympathetic response is where, your body just like intuitively does something without you really thinking too hard about it. Like you don't get in the way.
The motor reaction.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay. And so what you're really talking about is, hey, look, in the API management space, there's a company out there that makes an AI-based solution that looks for that learns the pattern of the API and then looks for anything that's not within the pattern. The company's called Elastic Beam, but I think you're getting at something which is, hey, it's great if it spots it. Like it's pouring through thousands of transactions a day or second or a minute, whatever the time frame is. But in the end, if humans have to take the response or do something with it, then you're already stumbling, right? Like you need the system to go fix that right away, like take that parasympathetic response into its own hands in a way that shelters the enterprise from harm. So would you, are you kind of saying that in addition to, just looking at like a chatbot thing as an example, that in general, the nervous system's just not in place, like, all the systems that need APIs for the brain that's in the jar to actually go out and tell them to do something, to shut down a router or to reprogram a firewall, that's just not there yet?
It's not there yet, but so there's going to be phases of AI success, right? I think most people agree it's going to touch every part of our lives in interesting ways that some we can see, some we can't. Now, I think AI is going to be, it's not going to be big leaps. It's going to be, millions and millions of small improvements across all sorts of things. And to that end, we probably won't even now, some of the things we see happening, we don't really see happening. I mean, we see Siri and Alexa, and those are very but sort of vocal elements in our consumer lives. But there's a lot more happening under the covers. I think most enterprises, their strategy to AI will be as consumers, not as producers. So a lot of the new systems they buy will be it will have AI, built into the functionality. Like the same for our platform. We've just been acquired by Salesforce. So Salesforce has Einstein, which is doing something similar. A lot of the other startups I talk to are building very interesting things where you're building smarts in from the ground up, which is actually a lot easier. So AI is going to be most successful in the next 2 years in closed systems. By closed, I mean well-bounded context from one vendor that understands all the inputs, outputs, and the data in between. So there's going to be a lot of advancements there, and there's a lot of really interesting stuff coming down the pipe from new founders with new ideas. Mm-hmm. Where enterprises struggle is really retrofitting this to their existing infrastructure. I mean, and obviously MuleSoft deals with that problem a lot, and it's a challenge just because it's really hard to have the infrastructure in place to have those motor reactions to certain types of events, whether it's changing the address or whether it's understanding the flow of information from one place to another and seeing if there's anomalies in between. That it's hard for enterprises to have the infrastructure to justify the cost of plugging in an engine on top of it. right? And we can talk about the ways we're seeing people starting to get successful, but that's going to be much harder for enterprises, and that's a longer lead time. But it's a problem that enterprises have today anyway, which is they find it very hard to plug in or unplug technology into their landscape. They've been working on sort of 2-3 year cycles, and given the amount of apps and the amount of capabilities out there, it needs to go down to 2 or 3 hours. And
okay, so an enterprise calls you in and says, we buy it. We get the brain in the jar thing. We want to leverage artificial intelligence because we want to be the most competitive company in our market. Russ, what do we do? Tell us what are the, what's the 5-step program here, or how do you get from here to there so that it is all working together?
So let me tell you what they do first, and then what they do when they come to us, right? So first they say, I want to do those things. I want to take advantage of the new technology. I'm going to buy that new technology, and then we're going to figure out how to bolt it into the organization. And that ends up often failing because they have no way to bolt it in. It ends up being prohibitively expensive because you can imagine if you need these, you need a way to call into multiple systems. The cost of integrating those specifically for these use cases is pretty high compared to the returns you might get. Because remember, I think the key thing with AI is it's not big leaps. It's actually going to be millions and millions of incremental benefits. So it's very hard to invest in a short-term win there, where really you're building up a capability over time. So quite often our customers have gone to the vendor first, tried it out, didn't get the results, but said, hey, we need to move faster. We can't connect these things in quick enough. And our whole talk track is, look, you basically need to unlock the core of your business. We do that with APIs. APIs are one out in the web. They've shown us that they drive agility, they drive innovation, just because if you package up a function, a piece of data or a capability as an API, it becomes very easy for people to then browse, discover, use, and build new value on top. Amazing enterprises don't work this way. Enterprises actually build everything from the ground up for every project they build because they haven't got the coordination. It's a long story. We can go into that maybe. But so what we talk about is putting an internal API strategy in place. And the goal of that API strategy is to, over time, add more and more APIs, software building blocks, to key systems. So you start to modernize the key assets that make a difference in your business, like customer, like product, like reference data, like transaction history, whatever it might be. But as we help companies deliver projects in their organization, they're also delivering these APIs. And what happens is, over time, they start to build up that nervous system. It's pretty basic in the beginning when you've got 3 APIs, but we've got companies been doing this 3 or 4 years. They've got thousands of APIs, and they can really just tap into anything. They can start to think about opening up ecosystems, and they can think about automation in a very different way, where AI really starts to shine.
Right. So the automation kind of goes both ways. You get to leverage the immediate benefit of some sort of AI technology that you embrace, because it can connect to the APIs throughout your enterprise, get to the data or whatever it has to sort through. But at the same time, it might even be able to take some action depending on the sophistication of the API.
Exactly. Because, I mean, obviously some internal APIs are just read-only. They're just for getting information.
Yeah.
But a few of them are actually transactional, where you can do CRUD operations, or you can affect a transaction.
In the article you wrote in CBR, it said something like that IDC anticipated that by 2021, which is only 3 years away, there would be more than $57.6 billion spent on cognitive and AI systems. You're making me think if some portion of that's just going to get wasted. Like, in other words, the companies are going to spend a boatload of money and they're going to end up just throwing a bunch of it away because it doesn't work. And if, the talk track you're talking about here is also a little, not just about leveraging AI, but also making sure that this investment they make pays off and they don't end up wasting, stockholder value.
Yeah, I mean, and there's 2 ways to talk about that. One is, the measurement of that is pretty interesting, because I think what they're really pointing to is also a lot of things that people buy today under the guise of big data intelligence will end up just rebadging as artificial intelligence. And I think that spend's probably being rolled into that. But like I say, I think most enterprises are going to be more like consumers of AI, not building AI engines themselves.
Right.
Some, obviously, but the key, I think, for every organization right now is to unlock the value of their enterprise as it is today, right? If you don't unlock it, if you haven't got a strategy for being able to easily get at customer data or invoicing information or product catalogs, whatever it might be, menus, then it's very hard to bolt things on the edge of the organization and get real value out of them, because you hit a point where it's too costly to reach into 15 systems to find that customer data. And if it's in the scope of just that one project, it tends to be quite expensive. But what we do is we say, well, for that project, we'll do it, but then we'll build it up as a reusable API, and that becomes part of your sort of enterprise nervous system, so that anyone else can now, discover and with permission get access to that data or a portion of that data, and use it for their own applications. And that's really where you start getting leverage. Because if you think about it, enterprises are like a treasure trove. Like, they all struggle right now, because actually, this is an interesting concept, right? So IT functions in organizations are treated like cost centers, which is insane. Think about that, right? You've got two key assets in any organization of any size. One is the people, right? The people always come first. It has to, because we drive, the engagement, the outcomes, and the thinking. And the data, what you hold about your customers around, or your products, whatever else it might be, is critical. And actually, the data is more persistent than the people are, which is interesting. Yet the part of the organization that looks after the data is a cost center, which means every year they have to do more with less. Every year their budget gets cut for the last 10 years. And now people are saying, well, we really need our data to do anything interesting, to provide better products and services. It's like, well, yeah, but you've been treating IT as like this boat anchor that's just keeping the lights on. So all they're doing is keeping the lights on. So the first thing you got to do is put infrastructure, like a plan in place for opening up that, so more people in the organization can leverage it without going through the central IT bottleneck. And then you can think very differently about how you plug in and plug out technologies. Like, it gets much easier if you're connecting two APIs together. That's not a very expensive proposition, and I think the tools in that space are going to ramp up very significantly in the next couple of years. That's pretty cheap. So if you can get to a point where all you have to do is plug APIs together, and you're using a discovery model much like the web to build these types of innovations, it's going to have a massive difference on the way enterprises think about bringing new technology in. I think it's great for the disruptors because it makes it easier for them to attach to bigger enterprises sooner. And it's great for enterprises because it means they get to try things out without having the massive cost overhead of doing things the old way.
Now, MuleSoft is all about bringing up these application networks, the nervous systems, if you want to call them that. And you're talking about how AI gets to plug into those application networks to either read or write. What about the API management system itself? Where can AI benefit that?
Well, actually, interestingly, there's a lot, right? So at runtime, at the very least, the management of APIs is around policy enforcement and understanding anomalies in the traffic and being predictive around what might be happening. So it's quite interesting. Also, the way APIs work in the enterprise is never just one API in the backend system. It tends to be in layers. So spotting something on the outer layer, like the edge, if you like, noticing that there's lots of requests, or you're getting some strange requests, or the headers have changed slightly. Like, having a system that's monitoring those things, like putting all that into policies is quite difficult. Having a processing engine that says, for every API I've seen, this tends to be the normal, range of behavior. But for this API, for some reason, it's behaving this way. It's slight, but I, should be aware of it. We can be a lot more predictive around behavioral changes, certainly as hacking methods become a lot smarter. Because one thing with APIs is they're pretty easy to secure, even though you get most of the the stories around hacking is around individuals inside the organization, not actually externally. But layered APIs actually allow you to have security at different layers, so it starts to become harder to move around in the enterprise as well. And I think that's going to drive up the sophistication of attacks. So you're going to need something listening that is looking for patterns that humans may not detect or not have the time to even
Sure.
really think about individually, but as an engine over time can actually start processing much more inputs to look at what might be happening.
Sure. All right. Well, we're running a little long here, so we don't want to keep listeners going too far into this. We could go. I could go all day with you, quite frankly, because you're thinking about so many things. So, one last question. You've been studying the area of artificial intelligence. You've been talking about chatbots a little bit there, where they play a role. Obviously, natural language processing is an area that's really big, and when we talk about Alexa and Siri and Google Assistant. And you're an investor, so what artificial intelligence technologies have captured your attention and imagination? What are you most excited about?
Oh, good one. So I'm amazed at how quickly the NLP capabilities have just progressed.
Mm-hmm.
Hound, for example, is really interesting just in the way it takes contextual data so that you don't have to ask every function starting from the beginning, but you can have more of a conversation. So the conversational UI, AI, and natural language processing is really interesting. It's a little bit terrifying when we saw from Google that they created an assistant that sounds like a human, which is like function of that. And you got to be really careful, right? I mean, I got why people got upset. People don't like to feel like they're being duped, and I think there's going to be many more missteps like that. And I think the most interesting about AI going forward is actually not the technology, because I think the technology is really starting to scare us. It's actually understanding the impact of that technology on society in the way we think about everything from job displacement to the type of skills you need in the workforce to where the sort of the job spectrum is going to play out over the next 15 years. Because I don't believe everything will be I think a lot of things that we should have automated 10 years ago will get automated, and that will do job displacement. I think it's going to create a lot more job opportunities. But we're not doing enough to really understand that. The technology companies definitely have a much more of a bigger role and responsibility here to think into the future around the impact of their technology, not just solving the immediate problem. And I think that's one thing, that agenda is starting to hit the market now. And I think that's probably the most interesting area for me at the moment.
All right. Well, Ross Mason, founder of MuleSoft, thank you very much. It's been great to hear your insights on artificial intelligence. Where are you going to pop up next? Where can people come hear you speak, or do you have anything on the calendar yet, or is summer going to be kind of slow?
So I'm in Paris next week for SASTRA, which is the big SaaS conference in Europe, and there's 1,000 people there, mostly founders and VCs. I'll be just talking about some of these topics. I love Web Summit. I'm looking to go back there again this year, and so those are the two big ones. And then, of course, I'll be at Dreamforce because we're now part of Self.
Well, congratulations on that acquisition. That was a big deal for you, and obviously for everybody in the company. Remember, as I said at the beginning of the video, ProgrammableWeb is also a wholly owned subsidiary of MuleSoft. So we're pretty excited about what the future holds. Where can people find you on Twitter?
Ross Mason, nice and easy.
Okay, great. Ross Mason, founder of MuleSoft, thanks very much for joining us today.
Thanks, David. Cheers.